Australia is to ban children from using social media.
The government is trying to regulate a wildly unregulated space.
Australia is not alone here. Russia, France and Denmark are mulling a similar ban.
Should children be banned from social media?
Hello and welcome to The Nexus. As you just heard, the Australian government wants to ban children from using social media apps by next year. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is worried they're not having a normal childhood because they're too busy on their mobile phones. Most Australian parents think he's probably right, but are they going to be able to help him enforce the ban? In a moment, we'll hear from a doctor who knows exactly what the constant scrolling is doing to our brains, and a British headmaster who's taken the unusual step of banning smartphones in his school altogether. But first, let's take a look at what they're planning in Australia.
Viral. Twitter.
TikTok trend.
Instagram.
New internet craze.
Online frenzies.
Algorithms.
I want to see kids off their devices. We want them to have real experiences with real people because we know that social media is causing social harm.
This has never happened before. There has never been a global, synchronized collapse of mental health. This is far larger than anything we've ever seen in terms of its effects on kids. This is way, way larger than COVID.
The data is very persuasive that something happened after 2010. A closer look at Australia from 2010 to 2020 shows that young people experiencing psychological distress rose by 74% for women and 55% for men. Some believe it's no coincidence that in 2010, Apple released its game-changing iPhone 4. The increase in psychological problems was seen globally. At the very least, it all correlates with the rise in smartphone and social media use.
The scariest example is a correlation between rises in teen suicide and the rise in use of social media.
We now know that many of the major social media companies hire individuals called attention engineers who borrow principles from Las Vegas casino gambling, among other places, to try to make these products as addictive as possible.
I would urge parents to limit the amount of social media that children are able to see because they're being programmed by a dopamine maximizing AI.
The big tech billionaires clearly know something. Microsoft founder Bill Gates didn't allow his children to have smartphones until they were 14. Apple founder Steve Jobs set similar limits. While the current Apple CEO, Tim Cook, who doesn't have children, is on the record as saying he'd never want his nephew using social media. Part of the reason is social media has been shown to hinder the development of children's social skills, limiting their attention span and ability to concentrate.
Kids who constantly consume things in 15-second bursts just can't focus on long-form communication.
Fatal online challenges have also become more frequent.
The Benadryl challenge is the latest in a growing number of risky social media trends.
All of these recent challenges are incredibly dangerous.
Most social media sites require users to be age 13 or above, but in order to create an account, no proof of age is needed.
South Australian children are likely to become the first kids in Australia to be banned from setting up social media accounts under new state government laws, with social media companies facing hefty fines for letting kids under the age of 14 access their sites.
14 and 15-year-olds would also need parental permission to visit social media.
Questions remain. How would this be enforced? We know that facial recognition and age verification software will be trialled in this country ahead of any specifics relating to this legislation.
Critics are sceptical about the Australian government's proposal. Australia's own internet regulator, the eSafety Commissioner, warned that restrictions may limit young people's access to critical support and push them to less regulated non-mainstream services. One suggested measure is for fines of 5% of global revenue for firms that do not comply in restricting younger users. Others, including Elon Musk, the owner of X, have mulled introducing paid subscriptions for social media, which would also act as an age verification process.
These services are free because they are monetizing you.
Well, as you can imagine, some Australian teenagers are pretty ticked off about the proposed ban, especially 16-year-old Leo Polisi, who has just created his own news channel on YouTube called 6 News Australia.
Good evening, thanks very much for your company on this very busy news day.
He is only a little older than the legal age limit that is being considered in Australia, but he's still very much against it.
The proposed social media ban just won't work, right? That's the biggest problem I think I have with it. It's not feasible. We know how easy it is for the current platform ages, which are usually 13 on most platforms, to be bypassed by teenagers. I can attest to that. They're really easy to get past. And unless you're putting in significant age verification, it's going to be hard for the Australian government to enforce that. And besides the logical arguments there, look, I just think that when you're talking about banning a 15-year-old from social media, from potentially YouTube, it's getting a bit ridiculous. We don't know what platforms are going to be banned yet. We don't know how they're going to do this. And mind you, here a 15-year-old can get a job, but apparently they're not mature enough for an Instagram account. It's all just a bit ridiculous.
Of course, some younger people do see the benefit of the ban. Dylan Mills, who goes by the handle Tedio on YouTube, actually deleted his own social media and found it to be a big help for his mental health.
It was hard at first, but it was definitely worthwhile, and it made you feel like, I have the line where it makes you feel like a kid again, because you kind of start to appreciate the little things again. You start to appreciate just your time, pretty much. It's kind of hard to explain, but you just appreciate your time more because you have more of it and you're able to use it more effectively, and you don't feel bad after wasting your entire day.
Well, those are the views of two YouTubers, but what does the general public think? We went to the streets of London to find out.
Should we be banning social media for under 16?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's the research has shown that kids aren't ready for it at that age, and that's the reality. It's too dangerous for them. It's changing their behaviours even as they're starting to develop the stuff they need to be an adult. So, absolutely.
From what I read in the newspapers, it just causes a lot of nuisance.
I think people should have freedom of using social media. I don't think necessarily it's all bad. There are some bad things that happen on the social media, like bullying and stuff like that, but if you try to sort of police all of that, you're kind of taking people's freedom away.
It's difficult because obviously the internet can be used for good and bad, and social media generally it's sort of developed into something that's not a positive thing. Certainly, there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of bullying, there's a lot of misogyny, racism. So.
I don't know if it should be banned for under 16s, because I think it's a way for people to connect and there could be a lot of good can come out of it, but I think there need to be controls put around it.
I think that's not a good idea. Yeah, because I used Instagram and other social medias when I was a teenager, and it didn't affect me any harm. So
yeah, I don't know. I'm only 18, but I didn't have a phone until I was maybe 10 or 11. So I didn't really know what I was missing in a way. So I think it's probably good for kids not to have it till maybe 12, 13.
Why? Why should we ban it? Well, as long as they kept safe on it, it's fine.
Yeah. Do you agree with that, sir?
I agree with that, yeah. They should be allowed to do it.
It'd be better if the kids weren't on social media, you get less predators trying to, do you know what I'm saying? But I doubt it's going to happen. Do you know what I mean? They make too much money off the kids.
Well, as we just heard, there is a lot of public support for a ban. Lizzie O'Shea from Digital Rights Watch in Australia, a group which campaigns for freedom and fairness online, agrees that safeguards should be in place, but disagrees with this particular government policy.
Me and many other digital rights advocates, advocates from the mental health space as well, remain extremely concerned about this proposal. And that's for a variety of reasons. It's not clear that the tech will work, so there's real concerns about the effectiveness of any technological barrier to young people accessing social media. Secondly, I think lots of people feel that young people have a right to participate in public life through social media and other platforms, and that ought to be protected. Thirdly, I think there's a real concern around how we leave the rest of the social media space untouched. I don't think it's good enough to place a ban on social media for young people, only to allow them at a certain age to access that space if it's still really toxic. So sometimes I think these proposals can be used to postpone more urgent reform that is needed to improve the quality of space, not just for people who are young, but also everyone who uses social media websites.
Okay, let's bring in our panel now. And today I'm joined by Dr. Brian Primack, who has studied the effects of social media on young people and is the author of You Are What You Click. David Smith is a headmaster in London who's just banned all smartphones from his school. And Ashley Thomas is a social media safety advocate in Australia. Welcome to the programme, everyone. Ashley Thomas, what do you make of your Prime Minister's move to ban kids from using social media apps?
I think it's great. We've been asking governments to really start this conversation for quite a while now. So I think that we can't dish, especially the Australian government, for wanting to take action in this space. How that's going to be pushed and regulated, I think, is the next question because, as we know, any young person wanting to pursue something or wanting to engage in something, especially when there's a restriction put in place, will find a way around that. So how that will be policed and managed, I think, is the next question that we need to be asking. But I think it's a step in the right direction that we've kind of been waiting for.
That's a great point. Teenagers, when they're determined, they will get their way. Let me ask you about your own experience, Ashley. You became a social media safety advocate because you had some terrible experiences yourself.
Yeah, so when I was 13, social media was being introduced, specifically Instagram, and I unfortunately developed an eating disorder after my exposure to social media. I found that during that time, I would say before social media, my body was never the subject or the point of contact. And when social media was introduced, all of a sudden my body was put on a pedestal, and that was how it was measured between friends, between community members, and then all of a sudden on a global scale. And I don't think young people are prepared for that. We think we're invincible and we think we're able to manage and take control of our lives, but we're talking about a social experiment, a platform where we all of a sudden see our bodies 24/7, as well as be exposed to other people's bodies and content that are glamorizing diets and trends and telling us how to control and view ourselves a certain way. And I don't think we can expect any young kid to be prepared for that and not come out broken or not come out without an issue because we're not trained or prepared for this. We really are that social experiment, and the younger people are receiving social media, the harder it is for them to also understand how to navigate it. And for me, I fell under that trap. I became so obsessed with my body and how it was viewed online that I became really sick, and I wasn't able to filter through the content. And as well, it was something that was so new and so fresh, and it was promoted and put in front of us as something that we should engage with because it was giving us this newfound idea of connection. And little did we know that it was making us more disconnected than ever.
Dr. Brian Primack, you obviously in your research and in your experience with youngsters have heard similar stories to Ashley's. Do you think Prime Minister Albanese is taking a step in the right direction?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge the story that Ashley just told. Ashley, I'm so sorry that you went through that. And unfortunately, this story is not unique. We see this all the time. And what my work has done is to demonstrate on a scientific level that these associations really are there. That when people are exposed to more social media, they generally have more depression, more anxiety, more social isolation. And we had a paper specifically addressing eating concerns that Ashley has been going through. Is the policy a good idea? I think in a lot of ways, it's very much a good idea. And mostly related to what Ashley said before she told her story. It's a good idea because it's finally bringing attention to the fact that this is a real challenge. I agree with her that one of the big challenges is going to be enforcement. This has always been the case. In addition, I think we have another challenge that we need to think about, and that is this whole idea of forbidden fruit. In other words, young people, especially rebellious young people who are about this age that we are concerned about, other studies when it comes to other kinds of warning labels and things like that demonstrate that sometimes kids become more interested and not less. Now, I don't think that that means that we should not enact the legislation. I do think it's a good idea, but I think at the very least scientifically, we need to understand that this is yet another challenge that we need to deal with in parallel.
Very tricky, isn't it? What do you think is the optimum age for teenagers to be allowed to have social media accounts?
I'm not sure. Frankly, I do the science, and we see the science working similarly with younger people than we do with older people. We don't have a specific developmental cutoff because, some of the products these days are for people as young as 10. Frankly, we don't really enable the ability developmentally to to deal with these kinds of exposures until much later. So, if I were to choose a number, it would be, much higher than you would think. And now we're finding the same kinds of things with 30 to 70-year-olds, that more people are, who use more social media are more likely to be depressed, anxious, and lonely, even when they're older. The difficulty is that we can't ban the whole thing. It's important to our society. It does have some positives that we need, and at this point must live with, and therefore I think that along with policy, we need to be thinking about education. We need to be thinking about other ways that we're attacking this issue.
So in actual fact, it's not really an age thing. It's about the individual, if they're ready to handle it, or are they perhaps very sensitive? So even adults can actually have their mental health harmed quite significantly then, Brian.
Yes, I recently was on the program to discuss how Tom Holland decided that the social media was too difficult for him and his mental health, and so he stopped it altogether. I mean, this is someone who 98% of the attention he gets on social media is incredibly positive. He's a very, very talented. He's a heartthrob. He's a big star. And yet even that small 2% is very, very difficult. That sort of illustrates to me, what about the rest of us who, don't get nearly as much of the positive strokes that he gets? This is a problem that we need to think about for our entire society.
David Smith, you're a headmaster in London, and you made the headlines quite recently by banning smartphones in your school. Why did you do that?
For very similar reasons what Brian and Ashley have just explained. I believe that if you hand a smartphone to a child, you're choosing to take away their childhood. Every single issue under the sun you can imagine a young person can face, we have experienced in our school, and that is through primarily the use of social media, and they're just not prepared. And I think Ashley said really well earlier that young people are just not prepared for the dangers that they're going to face. And what I am saying to parents is we need to control the narrative. At the moment, over the last few years, the children have controlled the narrative. They have told us what they can believe. They've told us why their bodies are important and what it means and what they can take and what they can have and how much of certain things they can have. And as adults, we need to decide, we need to control the narrative. Something I'm really a firm believer on is we do sex education in school. We have to, and we think it's really important, but we educate children about sex before they're having sex. And that's really important. We have to get there first. But with young people, we are educating them about smartphones when the door has already been opened to smartphones. We did a survey this last academic year, 56% of our boys, and we're an all-boys school, they got their first smartphone in year 5. So that's 9 or 10 years old. I think that's shocking. And then a further 38% of our boys said they've got unrestricted access to their phone. They can look at it whenever they want. They can look at any content they want to look at. And parents are naive to what their children are able to see and the damage that it has. So unless there's a genuine alternative, a safe alternative, I think the best thing we can do in society is to stop and get it right for the sake of the next generation.
Did you get much pushback from the children or from the parents?
Of course, that's part of my job. Ironically, the boys understand. If you ask our teenage boys, particularly those who are 15 and 16, when you are a father, what age will you give a smartphone to your child? None of them say 10, none say 11, none say 12. They always say an older age than when they got their phone because they know and they've experienced the danger. For the parents, it's the practical use of the technology. How do I track my child? How do I know they're safe? Can I contact them? How do they pay for things? But there's a naivety around the dangers that social media brings. So for me, there's an education piece. We talk about the next generation as the anxious generation. I feel the parents are even more anxious than their children because they've become reliant on the phones to help them look after their children.
True. And have you noticed any improvements in their behaviour, their attention spans?
Yes, of course. I think what is really clear for us as a school, our school's in the top 5% of the country. We haven't made this change because of behaviour problems. Last year, if you'd gone into the playground, you wouldn't have seen a phone. We already had a policy that phones had to be off. So this decision is a decision saying this isn't because of behaviour or academics. This is us challenging parents and saying, should your child have a phone? And certainly those who are younger, who have not brought a phone yet, what are you going to do about it and when are you going to buy one? But our boys on the way to school, they're talking to each other. It's really important. They're sitting on the tube and on the bus and they're having conversations. They're more aware of what's going on around them.
I think it's a great idea. Ashley, do you think had a ban like that been in place when you were a very young teenager, do you think it would have saved you from heartache?
I think it definitely would. I think as much as we know we need to talk about these regulations that are being put in place, and as I mentioned, it is a great initiative, I think community and connection is what kids need. And we're getting that falsely through social media, and that's what most kids are opting to choose, is to connect online when really it's making them more disconnected than ever. And we look at mental health statistics at the moment that are on the increase, and we're asking ourselves why, and we're trying to look for things to blame. But these kids don't have positive role models. They don't have communities they can turn to, and they don't have environments that make them feel safe and feel heard. And I feel, taking away those phones eradicates that excuse or that opportunity to interact with a world that is not making them connected at all. So I feel like if I had that in my situation, it would really help me to step outside of just focusing on my body and disconnecting with my community and finding my people and my purpose, and not turning to my eating disorder in order to cope with the disconnect I felt with myself and my outside world.
Dr. Primark, is there anything that big tech can do to make the use of mobile phones by teenagers less toxic and also less exhaustive? I mean, they're on there for hours and hours.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount that they can do, but they're not going to do any of it because this is how they make their money. And they hire armies of psychologists and other behavioral scientists in order to addict us and our children. So it's, it's a wonderful question, but what they could do is they could stop using all of those dramatic techniques to try to basically get at their market and addict their market. But it's not something they're going to do because it's counter to their business practice.
Well, we've seen this model before with big tobacco, big sugar, and so on. And what's tended to happen is that people from those industries have gone on to become regulators of those industries and then cut them a break with the politicians. Is that happening also with big tech?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think it's good that you bring up those other markets because they do some things that are helpful to us. And, again, they bring up the idea that young people are going to be seeking these things out because of the things that we are forced to do. I think these bans are good ideas, but we need to understand the psychology that then comes along with it. In other words, when it comes to young people, you can't just say no to something, because that's actually, it engenders something called reactance that makes them more interested in that thing, that presents it as forbidden fruit. So we need to offer people, in addition to the no, which I do think we need to offer, a burning yes.
David,
what are the things that come along with this? How do we push art and music and other outlets like that, sports, that can fill that void rather than just creating a void and making them more upset about our actions?
David, just a quick final question. You have your strategies at school to enforce the ban, and I think it's a relatively easy ecosystem to control compared to the home. Have you any strategies for parents?
Yeah, so I believe that we just all need to work together. I disagree with Brian there. I think we can say no. And I think this generation we have allowed them to be a generation where they can't be told no. Whereas every generation previously of young people were told no. And it is right for a young person to be told, this is the way you should be living your life. And this is why, and we explain it. And of course, there are other things that they can do instead. But there has to be a difference between an adult and a young person. A young person cannot be in control of the decisions they're making and cannot live their life based on their feelings. And we can see that because it all goes wrong.
David Smith, Ashley Thomas, and Dr. Brian Primack, thank you all very much. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and maybe on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.